you guys have actually heard incident response plan and you actually have one? All right, so just having a plan, but as she talked about, do you have a breach attorney? Do you have a critical incident response firm that you would call? Most people, when I come across somebody calls, and of course they're calling me because it's a really, really bad day, and they're like, what do we do? And I'm like, okay, well, first of all, who does your IT? They don't even know the basics, right? So let's get the basics down. And then when you talk about right of boom, the first thing we're going to do is try to think of it as your house. Somebody's broken into your house. First thing I want to do is stop them. Number one, do you even know they're in your house? Most people don't even know they're in your house. And when he talked about 8 months, the average breach is in your network 5 to 6 months. That's the average. Now, you can launch it faster than that, but most of the time they've been there. The reason they're there is they want to establish a foothold, and then they want to move laterally, and then they want to gain additional access. And the minute they get domain admin access, administration privilege, it's game over. You're done. They can lock you completely out, and you're starting from scratch.
So one of the things Jason touched on, and he said, we'll throw it back to the panel, is the role of backup. So if they're in there for 5 months, Larry, how do you build a backup plan that can cover that?
So you build a plan that is off-site. It's one thing to back up locally. Remember the old days, everybody would go home at the end of the day and we would throw a tape in and it would run once. Today backups are so sophisticated. We're backing up hourly. And all that data needs to go somewhere. A lot of times it goes locally first, but then it's taken off-site, encrypted in transit, encrypted at rest. The devices that you use either in the cloud and here really need to be disconnected, air-gapped, if you will, when they're not being used. That way there's no chance. It's one of the things that is going to be the saving grace to when you are right of boom. When boom happens and the world floor, the hole opens up and everything falls in it, this is going to be your escape plan. So you have to know your backups are good. Most people, well, I guess in a 5-month intrusion, if that's what usually it happens. So they're gathering information. So it depends on how far back you're keeping your backups as to how gracefully you can recover.
But that's a dollar amount. If you go back a year and you're storing a year in an immutable environment, right? I don't even know what immutable means.
Let's just call it immutable, untouchable.
Untouchable. So you go back a year. So you're paying that amount of money, plus you're paying for current backups.
Well, so here's the problem with that. You want the most current backups regardless, even if you store them in multiple places, right? But the thing is, if you have to go back to a backup that's a year old, you're in real bad shape. Recovering to that point is just absolutely, it's almost business closing, right?
So yeah, to that point, so when we start to do an investigation the first thing I'm going to do is go figure out when was the first intrusion. When did they first get there? Because then we know where we can start looking at backups. His point about backups is super important. You lose all negotiating capabilities if you don't have your backups. That means now I'm talking about, do we pay the ransom? Can we get the ransom lower? By the way, there's people who specifically work on ransoms for cyber attacks. And not only is it, am I going to pay it, will they honor it? You're dealing with criminals. People assume that if I pay the ransom, well, they're going to give me my data back. No.
I mean, there's no honor amongst thieves?
There's no honor amongst thieves. So you're in a horrible position if you don't have that backup.
So hold that thought for a minute. So we've got backups, we've got a left of boom plan. We think we need to do something. Gabriel, as an information security officer, how do you make it affordable to a small business if we're hearing how hard it is for the government? You know, they're fighting North Korea, they're fighting Russia, China. How do you make it affordable to a small business? What are those components?
The technologies are available to small business. It's the leadership to bring those technologies into the organizations that's missing. When you look at Fortune 100, 500,000, They invest a huge amount of money in this space because it is a significant business risk. They have stakeholders and shareholders to answer to in that space. But when you're a privately run business, $1 million in revenue, 2 million, if you're $1 million in revenue, how do you scale back that technology
How do you afford
down? Yeah, how can you afford it? And really, the technologies are out there. There's a lot of ounce of prevention that we can do to prevent a pound of cure. That you just need the guidance. You need the direction. You need partners in this space to say, hey, we're at risk just like everyone else. My ransom payment could be $250,000 on $1 million top line revenue business. I need to protect my assets. So who do I talk to?
Yeah.
Right? And that's the gap. The tools are there for us, for small businesses. The guidance just needs to be there.
So what can you force your employees to do to keep you safe?
Well, I mean, I think first and foremost, it's the culture of protecting the business, right? Having conversations with your employees to say, this is what's at risk. This is what's at stake. Like, this isn't a game. It's you could lose your livelihood in this business. And so educating your team members, they are the first line of defense, right? And teaching them what they should and should not do. And then the secondary approach to it is obviously saying, hey, look, we're going to have some limiting or some restrictions on how you conduct business, whether it be on a personal laptop. This is now really important with remote work. So people think work from home, but some of your employees are working at Starbucks on open networks. Like, have you dictated what the policies are on that? I saw a stat that said the University of Michigan said that 70% of people, if they find a thumb drive, will plug it in to see what's on it. Like, seriously? Like, that's maybe have the conversation like, hey, we don't use thumb drives, right? Like, these are simple policies that you can enact. But I think the number one thing is appeal to their better side, right? Hey, you're part of this business family. Don't engage in these activities. Be on the lookout. Be our first line of defense.
So we had thought some years ago the panacea would be, well, we'll just insure everybody, right? There'll just be money to pay a ransom. Is it that simple? Throw it out to anybody?
No.
Why not? Why not?
So, the last 2 years, candidly, the insurance companies got their ass handed to them. I mean, in a bad way. And so the insurance companies, a friend of mine runs cyber for Beasley, which is a very large insurance. They went and bought a 300-person security firm just to evaluate their clients because they were losing. Really, an insurance company only has 4 things they can do.
So let's stick on their IT, their thinking for a second. Why were they going backwards to look at what they were insuring? What were they checking?
Well, they're checking the fact that they're missing on the risk, so they weren't really looking to see what. When we look at risk across a financial industry, a financial services firm is a much higher target than, say, waste management, right? And so you've got to look at the industry they're in. You also have to look at the size that they are, and then you have to make decisions on what level of risk they have. They weren't doing that. So now,
So they're writing policies without knowing.
A lot of them didn't really realize, what the long tail is. Most people think that we'll get a ransomware, and maybe it's for a small business, it's $100,000. What they don't understand is the average business is out of business, can't do operations for 13 days. That's the average. So it's minimum a week, and it's usually 3 weeks. So can you run your business that long? So what about all of the costs that go? Well, it went crazy.
So Nicole, you've had experience left of Boom. You've had experience right of Boom.
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever had insurance companies that client thought they had coverage and it didn't pay out?
Oh, absolutely.
Why? What's the coverage for?
Not understanding what the exclusions from the coverage are, not understanding the type of coverage that you're getting. I think a lot of people now, I've seen, particularly pretty recently, people have obtained coverage for ransomware, but their coverage doesn't cover fraudulent wire transfer. And so they have one but not the other.
Yeah.
And then, on top of that, Jason alluded to this sort of initially is, maybe your policy covers ransomware, but if they can determine that the attacker is on the OFAC list, you can't pay them. And if you do pay them, then you're liable. And it wouldn't be sort of Jason's branch that would come knocking on your door, but another branch of government is going to come and say, you just paid someone on the OFAC list, now you're responsible for this.
So Larry, we've seen business owners in Hampton Roads go from business person of the year to ransomware in a 6-month slide. And if they think they have insurance, it may or may not even pay it. So what's the emotional toll to do nothing? What's the emotional toll for those owners that you've seen?
It's devastating. I mean, it's a major stress because not only has the business become inoperable, you have however many employees that are and families that are depending on you and that paycheck that you can't get to your funds, that you can't write a check for, or you can't even process the time to get them that money. It's emotionally draining, on top of the fact that you're dealing with all of the other folks out there. If you make the call to counsel, and you make the call to insurance, and they make the call to forensics, it's not a great place to be. It really isn't, and we've seen it. It is hard, and I don't know that people ever wholly recover, even emotionally. They just don't. I mean, it's a lot. And I know you've seen it.
And depending on the size of the organization, you may end up on waiving. I mean, it could be that. I mean, think about the organizations that you're involved with and what could happen politically or publicly to that organization's reputation. I mean, you could literally be on the 5 or 6 o'clock news.
And there's the old sort of W-2 scam, which still is around and still, people fall victim to that regularly. I think when you talk about the emotional toll, I've dealt with security incidents where you're dealing with, someone in the government contracting segment, and there's a pretty significant risk from a national security perspective to what has happened. I think the emotional toll when you're talking about your employees and you've accidentally just released their name, social security number, and their W-2,
Yeah.
I think that it can actually take a far greater toll on businesses than some of the other things, because those are the people that help you do what you do.
Yeah, my implied obligation to the employee's implied task for working here, and I violated that trust. So Scott, from an HR perspective, you're the gatekeeper. You have you got their banking information, you have their social,
Yep.
you have their passport. What kind of responsibility is that keeping it safe?
I mean, I think every business owner has to look at what data are you holding, and as a $5 billion professional employer organization, I mean, you think about 300,000 people with their names, dates, birth, socials, bank account information, 401k information. I mean, we are a target, right?
Yeah.
So regardless of where you work and the size of your company, figure out what your data is worth and know that you are going to be a target, right? And coach your people on what information, what are you going to be fished for? They're smart enough that they're going to come after you they're going to behave as if they are a client or customer, and you're going to give them information, right?
Yeah.
So educate that the attacker already understands what you do.
So Gabe, if we listen to Jason's 5 months, 3 weeks, there's left of boom, there's right of boom, and then there's the sonic boom itself. And he talked about intrusion prevention, firewall, keep people away. What's intrusion detection? What does that mean?
Well, it's identifying the adversary. Based on, I mean, their ultimate goal is to get paid, right? I mean, that's it. They want to get paid. They want to get paid as quick as possible. They want to make it as easy as possible for them to pay you. So they're going to go after whatever crown jewels that you have. In fact, I've seen some instances where they've actually pulled up the insurance policy for ransomware and set their limit at $10,000 below the deductible. Right? I mean, you're going to have to pay it anyway, so why don't you just send us your deductible and we'll be done with it? So, I mean, these are opportunistic criminals, and because they have generally such a long persistence in the organization, they can really fine-tune their attack and make it to be hey, we'll give you your stuff back for $60,000 because your deductible is $65,000, and That way we don't have to do an investigation, the FBI doesn't have to get involved, and we'll give you back your data.
All right, so let's say this is the best case, worst case scenario, and I want to pay $65,000 to Vladimir or Sergey. How do I do that, Jeff? How do I pay him?
Well, it's kind of funny. We were talking about going through the emotional. So one of the first questions I ask them is, first of all, when's the last time you slept? Because they're all delirious, right? They're panicked, all that. But then you start going through the steps. They get to a point where, okay, we have to pay. We just don't have a choice. Next thing, and I was dealing with, of all things, a shoe company, retail shoe company, $1.2 million ransom. And he's like, oh, we're going to pay it. I'm like, okay, first of all, do you have that money? He goes, well, I've talked to the bank, we're going to get it. Okay. How are you going to turn that into, and I don't remember the cryptocurrency that they wanted, but it wasn't Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Okay, then we spent 3 days trying to figure out how to get $1.2 million out of his bank account into an exchange so that it would go to this random cryptocurrency. So we lost 3 days. By the way, they paced. He would send back an email, and on purpose they'd wait 4 or 6 or 8 hours to respond, just to bring the panic up. These guys not only will they look at your deductible, they'll do a profile on your company to determine and they have statistical data to know what you will pay and what the chances that you won't pay. Some of these ransomware gangs, Jason talked about, they run a help desk. If you use their ransomware and you're having trouble with it, you can call their help desk. I'm not joking. It's a business. He was not kidding when he said, this is a business, right? They don't think this is crime. They think this is survival.
So every business put steps in place so you don't wire money to someone you shouldn't, right? Everyone knows that, right? I go to my banker and I personally sign something, Jeff, please wire, the following funds. So why can't you wire money to the criminal? Why is it in crypto?
You talking to me?
Yeah.
No. Well, number one, crypto's a lot harder to track, right? So when you start getting into wires, you start getting into federal, the challenges of all of that. The banking system is geared toward watching wires, and when you do it, I don't know if you've ever done an international wire, but man, holy hell, it took me an hour, right? So, but when you're talking about a cryptocurrency, there's no governing body, right? Very hard to track, very hard to trace, unless you are sophisticated.
So they call it Ethereum for a reason.
Yes.
Yeah. So Larry, from a network standpoint, what's the difference between a network you're installing today, a firewall you're installing today, and something you put in just 10 years ago?
Well, I think the bigger, really it's about where everything is. The network for us or for you is a gateway to some other location that your data may be stored, an application you may be using, how things get in, how things get out. So quite frankly, it's really this hub and spoke piece. And so in the old days, we would just put a firewall in place. Now we have to put not only the firewall in place, but we have to put intrusion prevention if something's coming in. We also have to layer in tools because not every application, is exploited the same way. By the way, if you're using any cloud services, backup, 365, ERP systems, health systems, those all have security pieces and parts that you need to be aware of. So there's part of the prevention is a big part of that is just monitoring. How do we take all the data that where you see things go in and go out? How do we scan that and look at that to make sure that we're not having a problem?
Yeah. So
That's what it
And
comes into.
just to add to Larry there, I mean, we probably all drove here. Well, I know a couple people walked from down upstairs, but we still had to get here, right? And really, unless you're driving a Tesla, the dashboard still exists, So Randy, sorry. But, you have all the gauges on there that tell you everything that goes on, and if you have a check engine light, something's going on. You may not know what it is, but something happened, right? Or you're speeding. You were speeding when you were pulled over by the cop because you had a display. And cybersecurity has those same gauges. We need to look at risk based on metrics, right? Have people been compromised? Is there information out there on the dark web that's using your corporate email and a commonly used password? Password reuse is a significant threat, right? I don't want to remember 1,600 passwords to 1,600 different sites. I'll just use the one password, or maybe I'll change a number here and there, or whatever. So that type of intelligence, that data or the logs that Larry's talking about, that has to be checked, just like you're driving in your car every day to make sure your environment's safe, everything, all your security controls are in place, and you have a good handle on your cyber risk or cyber exposure.
So the question you then we'll start wrapping it up. What if I have Microsoft 365? That's a cloud, right? What if I have Microsoft Azure? That's a cloud, right? What if I have a virtual desktop? So I don't really have anything in my office. Is that by definition all I need to do to be safe?
No.
Why not?
No.
Why not? What's wrong
Because
with
you to get to those three clouds, you have some level of infrastructure. Maybe you're sitting at home, or maybe you're sitting in a corporate office that has, hot seats where you can go into. There's always some gateway to get there. And every step of that path has to be protected.
Well, how are the Russians going to find me going into my Bill Gates Microsoft cloud? How do they know I'm there?
You can probably answer this better, but in my opinion, a lot of times these guys are casting a wide net. Whatever jumps into the net, whatever jumps into the boat, that's what they're going after. So is that?
No, absolutely. I'm going to watch that traffic going in and out of that cloud. If I'm going to target somebody, I'm going to capture that traffic, and then it's going to be pretty simple.
And it's even simpler as that. Everyone's on LinkedIn. LinkedIn had a hack. They have your email. They're going to start sending things based on your LinkedIn profile or Facebook. So they just start social engineering you. And they're going after where you just let your guard down once. Like, I have a UPS package showing up today, and guess what? I got a UPS phishing email just by random chance.
So you were at a hackers conference.
Yeah, I was at Black Hat.
You were at Black Hat in Las Vegas. So hackers conference, all the hackers get together.
The FBI's there.
The FBI was there. They didn't record names.
Most of these are good guys, by the way.
Right.
Let's be clear.
So
there's a contest there called Spot the Fed.
yeah.
But
But besides that contest, explain what the capture the flag was this year.
Oh, right. So so I was in a social engineering training class. So it was 4 days with Snow Offensive, who's a premier social engineering organization where they go on big engagements with Fortune 100 companies to try to gain access to buildings, data centers, corporate data. And the capture the flag for us was that they were going to place 2 clipboards in the network operations centers at Black Hat, which Black Hat is probably the worst area you could possibly ever imagine, because we're there learning exploits, and we're downloading malicious packages, trying them out in a I wouldn't say controlled environment, but in an environment where you have classroom running things against other classrooms and attacking. So we're doing what's called red team and blue team, which is attack and defense. And so our goal was that they took 2 clipboards, a red one and a blue one, and put it in the secured data center that they're running the entire conference operations on. So you're talking about access to switches and routers and network access and how they're doing their reconnaissance. And the goal was the NOC operation group came in and said, okay, the capture the flag starts at 12 and ends at 2:30. So you have 2.5 hours to social engineer your way into the NOC and grab these 2 clipboards, and we'll see how it goes. Okay? So everyone in class started working on it that day in the morning, trying to figure out. We're walking around taking pictures of badges for the NOC team and trying to figure out how to get in there. And then at 12:02, I was like, all right, I'm going to wait. I got to finish my lab. But at 12:02, after it opened, 2 minutes after they opened, those clipboards were in our classroom. They have been taken.
2 minutes.
2 minutes.
And was it a magic act? Was it that guy that makes lions disappear or anything?
No, it was literally one of the students went up, asked the security guard, was like, hey, I was told by so-and-so, who was the network operations manager, to say, he's told me to go get these 2 clipboards. They're right over here. Can you get them? The security guard walked them in. They picked up the clipboards and walked out. Now, what stopped them from saying, hey, that's my laptop I need to get for so-and-so and grab that and leave. So ours was a game, but it's really scary to think that social engineering or human engineering is one major fault in this organization. Now, they reset it, okay? So they're like, okay, the NOC knows that this game is going on and all this kind of stuff. They reset it. They put the clipboards further back in the NOC, and at 12:28, the clipboards were back. And what happened is that someone piggybacked on a NOC personnel into the NOC, grabbed the clipboards, turned around, and walked back out. So we're talking about a physical security issue, right? Someone didn't say, hey, why are you coming in here when you don't have a badge?
Crazy.
So
The thing that I want people to hear, Jason said something very specific, right? The vast majority of breaches are because MFA, two-factor, is not on. Credentials or passwords are poor, right? And you're not patching stuff. If you did those three things, you'd knock out 90% of the attacks. Just those three.
You mean change oil every 3,000 miles?
Basically. So, I mean, we're talking about the bar. You don't have to get very high. Now, you and I can get into a big philosophical discussion about small business and the cost of it and all that. That's a long talk. But hear me when we say he's dead right. It's just we're not doing the basics.
Yeah. Final question, Nicole. How simple could it be to have an incident response plan? How many pages, how many hours would it take someone?
Yeah, I think I mentioned this earlier, they don't have to be long. It's going to be really dependent on what your organization does. If you are in, the healthcare industry and you've got patient data, that's kind of its own sort of elevated class of sensitivity. But if you're not in that field, you maybe just have some customer data in terms of emails, names, addresses. You're using a third-party processor for payment and the like. Your plan may be very different because the level and sort of the intensity, so to speak, of your data is very different. So the plans can range. And again, I'm not an advocate for an overly complicated plan, because when you have to pull that out, it will be one of the most stressful situations from a business standpoint you've ever done.
Yeah.
If you can't sit down and read and understand what the next step is, the plan is really worthless.
Yeah.
So you may have some.
100%. So this happened about 2 months ago. They called, they're in a panic. I said, "Do you have an incident response plan?" "Yes." "Fantastic. Where is it?" "It's on the S drive." S drive is encrypted. Okay? So they can't even get to their point, right? So to her point, I like to see 2 or 3 pages as a start, and I like to start at the top with, who do I call first? Who's my breach attorney, right? Call Nicole. Who's my MSP, right? I'm calling Mary, right? Who's my critical incident firm, and then if it's different, who's your digital forensics? Who's my insurance company, right? By the way, nowadays, 95% of the responses are dictated by your insurance company.
Yep.
They'll call me, they'll say, "Jeff, we're ready for you guys to get on this." I'm like, "Who's your insurance company? Are we on their panel, the insurance panel?"
Yeah.
Right? So ultimately, don't make those super complicated. And the second thing is test them. Try it. What we call tabletops. Please, at least just, it's like having a backup plan, a business continuity plan, and you put it in a drawer and you never try it.
Yeah.
When this happens, if this happens to you, you will never forget it.
Let's try and end this part of it on a hopeful tone. Is there reason for hope for small business?
yeah, like I said earlier, the technologies have really scaled down to the SMB space. The prices are becoming commoditized. I mean, which is fantastic. Like, I come from a big enterprise background, and I was a federal contractor, so we poured tons of money into cybersecurity because of the risks involved. Now, to be on the other side as a small business, as part of a small business, and also talking with small business owners, it's great to see that technology finally get into this space. Yeah. It's like, because there really wasn't much, we couldn't compete. I mean, we can't compete as individual islands, right? My business thinks we need to do this or do that. But as we approach it from an entire business base, we can really economize on a lot of these technologies and make it effective. Really raise the game, raise the level.
Scott, why be optimistic?
I mean, I think, your people support you, right? Like, they're in the same game with you. They're in the boat with you. I mean, just make them a part of the solution, not part of the problem. Give them the tools that they can use to help protect the business.
Yeah.
So do the training, make them do compliance, help them understand how they can protect you when they're off-site.
Nicole?
Yeah, and to piggyback on that, I think particularly for small businesses, you'll find that your employees are very vested in you and your business. If you succeed, they are going to succeed, and I think employees of small businesses recognize that. They're your front line of defense. Tell them it's okay. If something looks suspicious, ask the question. Create that culture where they're not going to sit at their desk and just yes ma'am or yes sir and click the button. Train them, put that out in front of them, do those sort of phishing experiences, and make them sort of invested in that process.
Right. Larry, what do you got?
You guys aren't leaving me much. I mean, really.
You can trade places with Jeff.
I know, that'd be worst position, right? So, I mean, I was trying to think about the optimistic side of things. I don't know about you guys, when I was born, I went home in my mother's arms. There was no car seat. Things have advanced. The landscape has changed. You won't start or shouldn't start or be in business today without considering these extra tools. They're part of doing business. So by virtue of saying that and deploying these, you do reduce your risk. You heard Jeff talk about it, 2FA, about the patching, about some of the things. You do have the power to reduce the risk. Employee education, phishing education, those kind of things. So it is a war that you can stay on top of. You don't have to be under the wave. You can certainly ride the wave. It's going to be here. It's never going to go away. Every time you add an application, every time you add a device, every time you add another service, it is an attack vector that someone can try to get into. So staying ahead of it, which we all know we have to do, that's the optimistic piece. If I just jump on board, I plan for it, I budget for it, I'm doing so much better than the other guys.
Great.
So, you guys are right, not a lot, but there is,
Sorry.
I think there is something there in the fact that this is a knowable problem, and there is a formula for the solution. And what I'm trying to tell you is let's start at the top, and let's start knocking out the low-hanging fruit, and then we can get more sophisticated. And this will evolve too. Over time, physical crime has evolved, and so has policing. Cybercrime will evolve, and so will our defenses and our policing. And so it's just a way of life. But the fact that these tools are available, they're actually affordable. It doesn't have to be rocket science. It's a solvable problem.